Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Stephanie Quinu. Time right now coming up on 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific. And I do want to share with you some major news out of the court world right here. This is a story out of Idaho, as an Idaho judge will now consider whether or not to move the trial of Brian Kohberger, the man charged with killing 4 University of Idaho students back in 2022. Attorneys for Kohberger asked a judge this week to move the trial to a larger city, citing the widespread media coverage of the case and the impact that coverage could have on potential juror bias. Kohberger's defense team says strong emotions in the close-knit community and constant news coverage will make it impossible to find an impartial jury in the university town of Moscow, Idaho. They want the trial set for June of next year to be moved to Boise or another large city. But prosecutors say any problems with potential bias could be resolved by simply calling a larger pool of potential jurors and questioning them carefully. The judge said he would review the law and all of the evidence before making a ruling, saying it would likely be one of the hardest professional decisions he will ever have to make. To talk more about what the judge will need to consider, I do want to bring in Brian Claypool, who is a criminal defense attorney. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Sure. Happy Labor Day weekend, Stephanie.
And same to you. So as it relates to this hearing with the change of venue request, what does the judge have to take into consideration?
Well, Stephanie, I find it hard to believe that this trial judge says this is going to be the hardest decision of his life. As a criminal defense lawyer, at the foundation of a jury trial is the constitutional right that's afforded to a defendant for a fair and unbiased trial. And that's what's at issue here. For example, a witness was brought in by the defense, which is extraordinary. I have filed these motions before for change of venue. I have never brought in witnesses to give live testimony as to surveys they've done in the community. So this is extraordinary to start with. But here you had a witness say that 98% of the folks in, I think it's called Latah County, are aware of the case. 70% said, hey, I've already made up my mind that Kohberger's guilty. And then 50%, Stephanie, said, nothing's going to change my mind. Now, if you are the judge in one of the most highest profile cases in history, and you have that information before you, this should not be that difficult. This judge should grant a motion to change venue, send it up to Boise. And another reason why is too, that's a bigger city. So there's more stories that are propagating in Boise County. When you get in these smaller towns where these heinous crimes happen, that's really the soundtrack. That's all they're hearing for years until the trial's heard.
So how often, when, let's say, the defense asks for a change of venue, how often does that happen?
Yeah, great question. It doesn't happen that often. I had a big case a few years ago in Palm Beach, Florida. I defended Dalia Dippolito. It was a infamous case where she was on videotape saying she was 5,000% sure she wanted to kill her husband. I did her retrial and we asked for a change of venue. We thought we had a slam dunk because the video went viral, Stephanie, across the world, not only in South Florida. And I got to tell you, we lost that motion for change of venue. Because what these judges lean on a lot is, hey, look, we could, like this judge is doing, hey, we could bring in jurors from another county, number one. Number two, we've got to save money too, right? If we move everything up to a different county that's 5 hours away, it's going to cost a lot more. And then number three, in my case, what you can do here also, to give you the converse argument, is the prosecutors are going to say you could do what's called individual voir dire. What does that mean? You can take individual jurors, send out the rest of the jurors into a room, and then question individually these jurors as to their potential bias. And that's a tool that's used a lot by prosecutors as well to avoid having a change of venue, because you can dig deeper and dial in a lot deeper to find out whether there's any potential bias with the juror.
So I have to ask, if the judge denies this change of venue location and the jury does find Kohberger guilty, can his team then go back and say, well, the fact that you didn't allow this change of venue, there was bias and then have the verdict thrown out? I mean, legally, what is the recourse? And could that happen?
Yes, let's say the judge denies this, which I'm inclined to believe he's going to do that. That's going to be my prediction. I think he's going to deny this. He shouldn't. He should grant it to give a constitutional right to a fair trial. But let's say he denies it, goes to trial, Kohberger's convicted. If I was representing Kohberger, I would file a motion for appeal based on bias, that this was not a fair trial based on all of these studies that were done. And Stephanie, I've seen this happen before. After a trial is over, lawyers have a chance to talk to the jurors. And if you talk to one juror after this trial is over and they say, oh yeah, no, I knew I was going to convict this guy before I even heard any evidence, nothing was going to change my mind. If you get one juror that says that after a guilty conviction, then this case is reversed. And that leads to one of my final points I wanted to share with you. If this prosecutor is responsible and ethical, they should not be fighting this change of venue so hard. They should say, you know what? We want to avert an appeal on this case. We want Kohberger to have a fair trial. Let's move this up to Boise, Idaho, because we're confident we're going to get a guilty conviction in Boise, Idaho. That's what these prosecutors should be doing. And the optics don't look good for the prosecutors fighting furiously to stop this case from going to what's arguably a fair jurisdiction.
Now, Brian, you're saying that you anticipate the judge to reject this request. But given the arguments that you outlined, why would the judge do that if there is that possibility for the outcome, if it's not in Kohberger's favor, to then be, really put into the spotlight? Why wouldn't they just agree to the change of venue?
Yeah, because the judge is likely to adopt what the prosecutors are saying, which is, for example, hey, okay, there's going to be bias. Let's bring in some jurors from another county. So then the judge might say, going to deny the motion for change of venue, but we're going to ship in some jurors from another county where there might not be bias and bring them into Lata County, number one. And then number two, the judge is likely to do what I just suggested, which is give Kohberger's defense lawyers a chance to do what's called individual voir dire. It's not granted often, only in really high profile cases. And I think the judge, if he denies this, is going to allow that. And there is a decent argument for that you could dig in and ask. For example, you can ask a juror, hey, how many TV shows have you watched regarding this? What did you think of those shows? What's your political affiliation? And you could dig so deep. But here's the problem I have with that, Stephanie, is you and I and the world knows that jurors in these big high profile cases, oftentimes they hide information. Why? Because when the case is over, they might get a book deal. They might be interviewed on national TV, and they might not tell the truth as to whether they have any preconceived bias against Kohberger. That's why I think it's dangerous to keep this in Lata County, move it to a county further away to avoid jurors embellishing as well.
So when might we expect the judge to make that decision?
I think you're looking at probably a week or so, because he made this comment at the end, oh my gosh, I've got to look at the law. I mean, the law is not that complicated, right? I think the judge is just trying to give a signal to everybody, hey, I'm really going to look at this carefully. I'm not saying he's not looking at it carefully, but the law is not that complicated. It's what we're talking about. Can you get a fair jury pool? Is there any preconceived bias? Those are the big issues. We've already talked about that. But he's already said, hey, I'm really struggling with this. So I'm guessing at least a week or two before he gives a ruling on that. And he has more time too, because the trial is not set to happen until June of 2025.
Brian, any final thoughts before we let you go as it relates to this case?
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not taking any sides on this. In fairness, as a criminal defense lawyer, I'm a civil rights lawyer as too. We need fair jury trials, Stephanie. And when I see a survey that says that almost every person in a county is aware of this case, that signals you need to send this case to another county, and let's not spend a ton of taxpayer money on going through an appeal. Because I'm going to predict right now, if the judge denies this and Kohberger goes to trial and he's convicted, there is a strong likelihood that you're going to get an appeal, and we're going to see this go to round two again. And why is that important? Because you're traumatizing the family members again. We haven't talked about that. What about all the family members of the deceased? Do you want to go through two trials and re-traumatize them through another trial? That's why prosecutors should have stepped up, done the responsible thing, said, yeah, looks like it's unfair here. Let's go to another county and we're going to kick your butt there.
It is going to be very interesting, Brian, to see what the judge decides as it relates to this change of venue request. No doubt we'll be speaking with you more on that when that decision is announced. We do appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.